Okay, great. Can you hear me okay? Hello, everyone? I don't know if anyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Talking to myself. Hi, everyone. We are really delighted to have a fabulous speaker today, Sarah Lazar. I am Crystal Park. I'm part of the emotional well-being network that we have at UConn. We're one of 6 emotional well-being networks, and we have been participating with InCHIP on bringing some of the speakers here, unfortunately just virtually. We're bringing Sarah here today. And I did want to mention, thanks to Donna Lynn's prompt, we are sponsoring with another emotional well-being network an emotional well-being summit this year at Society of Behavioral Medicine. It's going to be the day before, and we're inviting people who are interested in learning more about emotional well-being to apply to attend. There's a lot more information about that on our website, the Emotional Wellbeing Network at UConn M3EWB. And as part of our work in thinking about emotional well-being and mind-body issues and some of the mechanisms through which mind-body might influence health, that we have invited Sarah here today to speak with us. I've known Sarah for a long time. We've done some research together. She's just a remarkable researcher and has a lot of kind of coalescing interests. She's an associate professor in the Psychiatry Department at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Her research focuses on neural mechanisms underlying the beneficial effects of meditation and yoga, both in clinical settings and in healthy individuals. She's particularly interested in meditative practices as they change the flow of information within and between the major brain networks during emotionally challenging situations. So she didn't want a long introduction, but I just wanted to say we are really lucky to have her here to speak to us because she's just doing such really innovative and important work. So thanks, Sarah, for being here with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Crystal. That was a very nice introduction. It's great being here. I'm really happy that there's more and more emphasis on well-being and not just on pathology. Today, though, I'm going to be talking about pain and fear, because that's where our most recent data is on and our most comprehensive data is on. So perhaps we're just trying to do a little bit more on the well-being side of things. And so I'll hopefully come back and show that in a year or two. So, but this is all related. It's all related. Let's do this, share. Okay. So you all can see this, I hope.
Yes.
All right. Let me just get rid of that. All right. Put that down there. All right. So today I'm talking about pain and fear and meditation in the brain. We're going to start with mindfulness. It's a word that we hear thrown around a lot. Lots of times people don't have a really good idea of what it is. So this is the most commonly accepted definition of mindfulness: purposely paying attention to experience in the present moment in a non-judgmental way. And this cartoon, I feel like, really captures it in a nutshell. So you got 2 people walking through the forest. One is completely oblivious to everything around her. The other one is completely in sync with everything around her, right? So she's noticing the trees and the sunlight, the wind on her face. This woman not seeing any of that. And so it's present moment experience in this open, curious, non-judgmental way. And a lot of people get caught up on this last part, non-judgmental. I prefer the word equanimity, because a lot of people, it's like, does non-judgmental mean that, just everything's okay? And in a way, yes, but there's a little bit more to it. So the idea is that it's not apathy, right? We care. We're open, we're caring, we're not shutting down and being like, oh yeah, whatever. It's like, okay, it's all good, right? It's a little bit different, but an important distinction between the two. And we're going to see that distinction in the brain today. Another thing to notice in that last slide was that neither one of them were meditating, right? So mindfulness is it's very, very simple. It's just present moment awareness in this open, caring, non-judgmental way. And you can do it anytime, anywhere. The problem is that it's not easy to remember to do it. It's a skill. And like any other skill, it can be trained. And so what mindfulness meditation is just training that skill. And so we're trained to be open, relaxed, curious, aware, and curious of the present moment. Typically during meditation, we focus on breath or body sensations, but also sensory stimuli. So for instance, sounds or perhaps postures, or I guess that's body sensations, or if you're outside, you could be noticing the sun on your face or something like this. And you could do this for 10, 20, 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day. And so you're not lost in thought, you're not spaced out, you're not in a trance. You're just really aware of, okay, what am I experiencing right now? And you're doing all this with this open, curious, non-judging attitude. So that's mindfulness meditation. And so today we're going to talk about something called mindfulness-based stress reduction. So what this is that, because originally mindfulness was taught in the context of Buddhist meditation. And about 40 years ago, somebody named John Kabat-Zinn, was practicing in Asia in the Buddhist tradition. And he realized that mindfulness was a really key, powerful tool, and that it could be extremely useful in clinical contexts. And so he was one of the first people to divorce mindfulness from the religious traditions from which it was derived, and taught it in a completely secular clinical context. And so he calls this program Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, or MBSR. And what that is, it's an 8-week group intervention. There's weekly classes with stress education and meditation practice. And so in class, you actually get 40 minutes of mindful meditation or mindful yoga. And so this yoga, it's not the type of yoga you get at the gym, right? So it's not about a workout. It's not about getting into a pretzel. It's not about, enhancing the body. It's about enhancing mindfulness. So the idea is, as you're moving your arms through space and doing the yoga poses, can you just be aware of your hands and arms moving? Like, how do you know where your arms are in space? How do you know your arms are moving? What's the actual sensation in your body as you're moving it through space? Or you do a body scan, which is where you move attention sequentially through the body, starting with the top of the head and then moving slowly down. What doesn't matter? Sometimes you start at the top of the head, move down, sometimes the toes go up, but just very slowly over 40 minutes, moving your attention through your body. Or you just pick one focus, say the breath in the belly or the breath at the nose, and you just pay attention to that for 40 minutes. And then in addition, very importantly, they're also given recordings and are told to practice every day at home for 40 minutes. And they're also encouraged to do anytime mindfulness. So this goes back to that first slide. So while you're walking, say, from the car to your office, rather than thinking about all the things that you have to do today, can you just be aware of the sun, what's around you, your actual present moment experience as you walk, say, from the car to your office, or walking from one meeting to another meeting. Can you just be aware of whatever you're experiencing in those moments? When you're stopped at a stoplight, can you just check in with your body for that 30 seconds that the light is red? So that's ideas that you want to just drop mindfulness in throughout your day. And the idea is that with these intentionally practicing it, it becomes more spontaneous even when you're not practicing. Okay, so there have been thousands of studies now demonstrating that it's very good for decreasing stress, both self-reported stress, but also cortisol, inflammation, and other biomarkers of stress. It's also good for reducing symptoms associated with depression, anxiety, pain, and insomnia. I'd like to highlight these four just because they're so prominent and so prevalent, I should say, both within psychiatry, but also within general medicine. Even if people have, cancer or heart disease or, other conditions, often the person also is experiencing one or more of these at the same time. And we know from the whole mind-body connection that if we can help these, we can have secondary effects on these other disorders. And then, as we know from the work of Crystal and other people, we also know there's increasing evidence that it's not just getting rid of the bad stuff, it's actually enhancing the good stuff too. So there is increases life satisfaction with work, with family, and with health. There's also increases in compassion and gratitude. Um, and so there's lots of positive benefits in addition to the just in normal well-being, in addition to helping people who have psychopathology. All right. So in the first studies we did was to say, because what happens after these 8-week courses is people often say, oh my goodness, this program changed my life. And they report just dramatic changes in their emotional well-being and in their ability to cope with difficulties. And for me, it suggested neuroplasticity. And so one of the first questions I asked was, can we actually see changes in the brain following these programs? And the answer is yes. So what we did is we took people who were about to go through this 8-week MBSR program, and we scanned them before and after the program. And we compared them to people who were just scanned 8 weeks apart, and then right after the second scan, they went into the program. And what we see is that there were several brain regions where there's increased gray matter in the meditation group compared to the controls. So one of the main regions we see changing was the posterior cingulate, which is involved in self-related processes, the supramarginal gyrus, which is involved in perspective taking and attention, like do I pay attention to the external world or the internal world, and the hippocampus, which of course is involved in memory. And the PCC, I always get a lot of questions about the PCC. So the PCC, it's also involved in so self-related processes, but also mind wandering. And so a lot of people think, okay, increased gray matter, and it's like self-related processes and mind wandering. We want less of that with meditation, right? And supposedly meditation helps that. And indeed, what we see is during meditation, this PCC gets turned off and is less active from pre to post 8 weeks of training. And what we know is that sometimes more gray matter means increased activation, but sometimes it means increases in inhibitory neurons. And that's what we think is happening here. And that we're getting increases in the neurons that are shutting this region off. Because again, we're seeing it getting shut down with repeated practice. We also saw a decrease in the amygdala, and the change in the amygdala correlated with changes in stress. So the more stress reduction people reported, the smaller their amygdala became. And this is important because lots of times critics were saying, well, it's been 8 weeks. Of course their stress is less because, just time has passed. Or, they put a lot of time and money into this program, and so it's just a placebo effect. And so this data really suggests that no, there's a real neurobiological reason why they're reporting less stress. It's because something's happening to their amygdala. All right, so that was stress. Now we're going to talk about pain. And this was a study done by a grad student at Tim. And this was a study done with people who had many, many years of meditation practice. And so just a quick overview of pain. So what happens with pain is, you stub your toe, you burn your finger, whatever. The pain signal comes in, it goes up the spinal cord, into the brainstem. And then this blue network is the sensory network. And we know that there's two components of pain. So one is the actual sensory experience, so the stabbing, throbbing, burning sensation. And then there's the emotional component that, wow, I don't like it, make it stop. And those are distinct in the brain, right? There's been lots of research showing that that they act independently and that all sorts of factors can influence those. So, oftentimes like when we're young, how we learn to respond to pain. For the parents who are one of these, like, oh, just suck it up, versus, oh, poor baby. That will influence the degree to which these networks are in sync or not in sync, and how these networks interact with each other. And there's been a lot of research with pain coping and pain regulation, including attention and distraction. So, just not paying attention to it, changing expectations when the doctor says, oh, this isn't going to hurt a bit. Or with placebo, like if I put a cream on you and say this cream is going to block the pain. And what we see in all three of these forms of pain control is the same, is the front part of the brain, the executive part of the brain, shut down the sensory signal in the brainstem, right? And even down into the dorsal horn. So this pain signal comes in, and normally it would come up. But when there's pain regulation strategies going on, it stops. And so it just doesn't come up. And so you just don't even feel the pain because it's just not coming up and coming through the sensory system, right? So it's just shutting it down before you can even feel it. So the question was, what about meditation? Because there had been some research demonstrating that meditation was good for pain. So what we did is we put these long-term meditation practitioners in the scanner, and we applied a very mild electric shock to their hand, just very briefly, intermittently over 40 seconds. And then we had them rate the pain, both the intensity of the pain, so how much the sensory experience of it, and the unpleasantness, right, the emotional component of it. And what we saw is here in the meditators, so the blue is baseline and the green is the, I forgot to mention this. So we had them do it both in a regular state and a mindful state. And the controls, of course, they'd never practiced meditation before. So we just explained mindfulness to them 5 minutes before they went in the scanner. And so here in the mindfulness practitioners, what we see is that here in the front of the brain, the executive part of the brain, which is shutting things down during other forms of pain control, we see that it's getting shut off. But in the controls, it's getting turned on. But then back in the sensory cortex, right, the insula, we're seeing this get turned on in the meditation practitioners and turned off in the controls. So what we're seeing is that in the controls, it looks like other forms of pain regulation. But in the mindfulness practitioners, it looks the exact opposite, right? They're turning off the controlling part of the brain and turning up sensory cortex. And at first, this is a bit of a head scratcher. But then we thought about it and we thought, aha, mindful attention or mindfulness is paying attention to sensory experience in the present moment in an open, curious, non-judgmental way. And so this is exactly what we're seeing, right? So they're turning off the judging, controlling part of the brain, and they're turning up the dial on the actual sensory experiencing it. So they're experiencing it more in this open, non-judging way. And what we saw was that there was really no change in the intensity of the pain rating, but the unpleasantness went way down. So although they're feeling it more and they're not stopping the signal from coming up and they're feeling it, they're saying it's less unpleasant when they're in this mindful state. And so this is equanimity, right? This is back. So it's open, it's caring. It's not, oh, yeah, whatever. It's not defensive. It's just being open to how things are in this open way. All right, life is painful, suffering is optional. And this is really the key of what Buddhism is all about and mindfulness is all about, is that, we can't expiate the pain of life, right? No matter how happy we are, no matter how well adjusted we are, even if there's no, anxiety or depression in our lives, we're going to encounter pain from time to time. How we respond to that is completely up to us. And mindfulness helps us deal with the little ups and downs, the big ups and downs of life. This is part of the how it's working. All right, so that's pain. So now we're going to talk about fear of pain, right? Because there's pain. Because again, the pain, there's that's the pain in the moment. But there's also the, I know things have been bad in the past, and so oftentimes people with chronic pain. We'll switch to chronic pain first. So people with chronic pain, oftentimes they avoid doing things if they think it's going to cause them more physical pain. But also, for those of us who don't have chronic pain, we avoid the unpleasant. We really avoid the unpleasant. We go out of our way to avoid the unpleasant. And so, because of the fear of, having emotional pain of one sort or another. And so the question is, what about that? Can we do anything about that? So this is a series there's actually 4 studies, but this is the 3 main ones. Britta Holzel, Ganesh Savink, and Ashika Leibovitz led these 3 papers. This one just came out a few months ago, the last one. All right, and so there's actually 2 studies. There's a first initial pilot study and then a full-blown study. So the first pilot study was by Britta Holzel, and what we did was it's a fear conditioning protocol, and I'll show you that in a second. And we did that in the scanner. And then people were randomized to either MBSR or wait lists. And then at the end of the 8 weeks, they again went through this 2-day fear conditioning protocol. Everyone was seeking stress reduction, but any sort of psychopathology or psychotropic medications were excluded. The second study, which was larger, same design, but instead of being randomized to a wait list, they're randomized to an exercise and health education program. And importantly, everyone was told that there was no control group, that both groups were beneficial. And this is true. We know that exercise is really good for reducing stress. So our study was not about asking, is meditation better than exercise? But rather, how are meditation and exercise different, or are they different, right? Because if meditation and exercise are the same, then, why should I meditate? I'll just exercise, right? But if they're different, then that has implications for personalized medicine and for, in terms of how, prescribing for different conditions. The exercise group also got information about diet, sleep hygiene, positive attitude, and humor. And both groups were instructed to practice 40 minutes per day at home. And so the exercise group, they're given TheraBands, and they're shown exercises for doing various different stretching exercises. And they also did some aerobics. All right, so both groups reduced stress, right? And again, we know and we expected this, that they would be comparable in their stress reduction. But the mindfulness group also provided benefits in emotion regulation. So this is the difficulties in emotion regulation scale. So the down is better, less is better. And also decreases in anxiety. And again, there was no change in anxiety. This is the anxiety sensitivity index. So again, a nice decrease in the MBSR group, no change in the exercise control group. So the first hint that, they do provide different benefits. We found that the changes in both stress and emotion regulation were correlated with the amount of practice. So the more you practice, the more decrease you have in stress and difficulty with emotion regulation. So now, all right, fear conditioning. How are we doing on time? Okay, good. All right, so good old Pavlov, right? So Pavlov, normally dog sees a bone, they salivate, ring a bell, dog has no response. But if you ring the bell every time you feed the dog learns the bell means I'm going to get food, and he salivates. And so eventually the dog learns that, the bell means I'm going to get food. And so even if you don't provide food and you just ring the bell, the dog salivates. So we're going to do the same thing, except for instead of food, we're going to provide a mild electric shock again. And instead of bells, we're going to show lights. So it looks a little bit like this. So in the scanner, again, they're getting that mild electric shock. But up on the screen above them, they're seeing pictures. And in the picture, they'll see different colored lights. And the lights are, very importantly, they're not given any instructions, right? So in the last study, we told them, okay, be mindful in the scanner. In this study, there's no instructions. We just put them in and said, hey, you're going to see some lights. You're going to get shocked occasionally. Just pay attention, right? Nothing about being mindful. And so it's I'm going to walk you through it bit by bit, but basically they went through conditioning, and then they immediately went through extinction. They went home and they came back to test how well the extinction worked. So I'm going to start with conditioning. So what you see is they saw 3 different colored lights. And in this case, the red and the yellow lights, they got shocked, versus the blue lights, they didn't get shocked. But the colors were always randomized. So everyone got a different combination of lights. And what we saw, this is a little bit complicated. So for the controls, what we saw, or we'll say at baseline, both groups were the same. So they had this is skin conductance, big skin conductance reactions to the red light when they're getting shocked, right? And actually, this is when because I should say this, they didn't get shocked every time they saw the light. They only got shocked 30% of the time. So this is the response to seeing the red light when they were not actually being shocked. So as you can see that they learn very quickly that red light means I'm probably going to get shocked. And so they have a big skin conductance response getting shocked, versus little or no response to the blue lights when they're not being shocked. That's at baseline. At post, what we're seeing is that the controls, they are no longer responding to the red light, versus the meditation group, there's no change basically from baseline. And so again, at first we thought this was a little bit head scratcher, but then again, we thought about both the pain study we did and also the definition of mindfulness. And what we realized what's happening here is that, so the controls, they're remembering from 8 weeks ago that red light means I'm going to get shocked. And we know, like I showed you before, the best way to control pain, shut down the signal, don't feel it. And so that's what we're seeing here in the controls, is that they're seeing the light, they're not getting startled to the light. They're even to the blue light. They're suppressing their startle response. So they're really shutting down their startle response and their fear. Versus the mindfulness group, there's no change. And so this suggests that even though they remember also from 8 weeks ago that they're going to get shocked, they're responding this open way and they're not shutting down. And we know from other studies that have nothing to do with meditation that this is actually healthier, right? That people who do this tend to not do so well, and that this is a healthy response. And indeed, that's what we saw in this study as well. Oh, sorry. So this is equanimity again. So the more people look like this, the more stress reduction they reported. And the more they look like this, the less stress reduction they reported. So it does suggest that. And then also, furthermore, we saw changes in the uncinate fasciculus, which is a major white matter tract between the amygdala and the front of the brain. And again, the more this white matter tract changed, the more pre and post looked the same. And the less it changed, the more they look different at baseline. Sorry, at post. So again, we're seeing so that the how the front of the brain is talking to the amygdala is changing and is leading to this more open, equanimous response. And so importantly, because that pain study, that was the people who had at least 5 years of practice. Many of them had 10, 15, 20 years of practice. And we're showing that after just 8 weeks of training, we can get this more equanimous response to pain. And also we're seeing that these mindfulness-related changes in white matter between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are enhancing this learning not to fear the pain, right? So these structural changes in the amygdala. All right, so that's conditioning. Now we're going to talk about extinction. Why do we care about extinction? So exposure therapy is based on exposing people to fear-inducing stimuli until the fear response declines. And we know from exposure therapy that, again, in order for exposure therapy to be successful, In order to be successful, the person has to be open and actually exposing themselves to the fear, right? So if they're avoidant of the fear-inducing stimulus, extinction doesn't work. And we know that mindfulness, again, is this open, present moment experience, non-judging, inquisitive, this whole thing. And so we've hypothesized that mindfulness should enhance extinction. And that this may be why, because it's been shown that mindfulness is really good for different types of anxiety. And so this may be part of the reason why mindfulness is contributing to, part of the way that mindfulness can help with anxiety disorders is by making the person more open and experiencing their fear-inducing stimuli. And so the idea being, right, that mindfulness is providing optimal conditions for exposure to the person's stimuli. So extinction. So during conditioning, red and yellow meant I got shocked, blue meant I was safe. During extinction, and this is right afterwards, like so the minute they finish this, they then go into extinction. We show them the red light and the blue light, but we don't shock them, right? And so they learn, but we don't show them the yellow light. So they learn that they learned red light means I'm getting shocked. Now they learn red light means I'm safe. Blue light still means I'm safe. No information about the yellow. We'll come back to that later. All right. So first we're going to look at brain activation throughout the entire 8-minute scan. And so Joe Ledoux and Danny Pine had this hypothesis. They call it the conscious experience of threat network, right? The idea being that, again, if you're open to the threat versus if you're kind of aware of the threat, that's different. And so they're talking, it's the salience network. So the salience network is a network of brain regions that include the amygdala, the anterior cingulate, the insula, and the thalamus. And that the idea is that this network is important for processing threat, and which is important for pain and fear. And our hypothesis was that mindfulness, because again, we're increasing the awareness of the sensory experience, that we should be able to increase this sensory awareness, and that then this would lead to enhanced identification of what is fear and what is safe. And then this would then change the memory encoding and reappraisal. And basically, yes, this is what we found. And so what we saw here, so again, this is the thalamus, which again is a key node of the sensory network. Because again, the pain signal comes up through the brainstem and, it hits the thalamus and then goes out. And what we're seeing is that indeed there's a big increase in the MBSR group, and again, a slight but non-significant decrease in the control group. And again, they're not being zapped, right? They're just looking at lights at this point, but yet we're seeing this increased activation of the salience network. And then here's some other regions. Here's the insula. Here again is the thalamus and the caudate. And then also, we're also seeing some prefrontal cortex, and so that's part of a different network. But this is it's part of an executive control network, but it's known to often co-activate with the salience network and to sort of coordinate interaction between this attention network and the salience network. And it's also important for involved in reappraisal. And so we're seeing, again, this enhanced attention to the red lights, even though they're not being shocked. Here, we saw this active, so the hippocampus and amygdala right next to each other. And so we saw this activation blob that encompassed both the hippocampus and the amygdala. And what we saw is that normally it gets shut off during extinction and deactivated. In the controls, there's basically no change, but in the mindfulness group, there's a big increase in activation, right? So they're not turning it off as much as the controls at the post-time point. And so again, the amygdala is involved in retrieving the memory and reactivating the memory, and then the hippocampus is involved in consolidating the memory and then remembering it for future. And what we see is also that the change in activation is correlated with changes in hippocampal volume, right? And so the more the hippocampus increases, and this is the region that we're seeing changes in structure, pre-post MBSR, we're seeing that this is increasing in the MBSR group, but there's no correlation or non-significant correlation in the control group. All right, so the takeaway is that we're enhancing activation of the salience network and the sensory awareness of it, and we're also changing the hippocampus and the DLP-FC activation. So we're both so it's reactivating. Sorry, I'm not saying this well. There's part of the talk that I had in, and I just took it out right before the talk because it's not published yet, and I realized this was being recorded. So sorry about this. It's a little bit jumpy here. So sorry. So the idea is that, so the part that I took out was showing that the amygdala and the hippocampus are actually talking to each other, and we can actually see the memory being transferred from the amygdala to the hippocampus over the course of the 8 minutes. And so what we're seeing is that the amygdala is reactivating the fear memory. It's getting reappraised by the salience and DLP-FC, and then apparently getting encoded in the hippocampus at the end of this 8-minute scan, right? And so it suggests that, and this is related to, again, changes in hippocampal structure. And so this suggests that we are indeed having an enhanced extinction. The only way to test this, though, is to bring them back and test them the next day, right? So clearly their brain activity during extinction is different. But the question is, so what? Does it make a difference? So we bring them back the next day and we say, okay, how well did you learn that extinction? Because extinguished memories must be remembered. Again, in clinical context, if someone has that spider phobia and you expose them to the spider, if they don't remember, and you extinguish that fear memory, if they don't remember it, they go home, they see that spider, they're going to still have the fear reaction to the spider. And we know that often people with anxiety, their hippocampus is smaller and they tend to have poorer memories of extinction compared to controls. And in this particular fear conditioning and with the lights and the shock, that multiple different anxiety disorders have been shown to be less good at remembering the extinction protocol. You said that. And because, again, the hippocampus is crucial for memory and it's retrieving the extinction memory. So that was our big question is, okay, so we know this hippocampus structure is changing. Can we actually show enhanced memory? So, right. So during conditioning, red and yellow means I'm getting shocked. During extinction, we learn red light means I'm safe. Yellow light, I've got no new information. Blue light still means I'm safe. They go home, they come back the next day, and again, we show them the red light, yellow, and blue lights, but we're not shocking them, right? And so the question is, how are they responding to the red light? When they see the red light, do they respond like extinction or they respond like conditioning? And so the way we do that is we compare the red light to the yellow light and the red light to the blue light, right? So if the red light is response to red light is like the yellow light, that means they've forgotten, versus if they're responding more like the blue light, that means they've extinguished it properly and they've properly encoded the extinction memory. And the short answer is yes. So in the meditation group, what we're seeing is a significant increase in their memory, in their ability to remember that red light means I'm safe. There's no change in the control group. And this group difference was significant as well. All right, so now what about happening in the brain? So again, it's a little bit complex. So what happens is that, and again, this has been well established, nothing to do with meditation. When you first get in the scanner and you first see those lights, even the first 2 or 3 lights, things are happening. Like you have to, because what has to happen is you have to decide, okay, which memory do I call? Do I recall the conditioning memory, or do I recall the extinction memory? And what we see here is that, again, the DLPFC, which again is this executive control region, which is known to be involved in suppressing the conditioning memory, and also the retrospinal cortex, which is involved in context. And I didn't talk about context, but it's important here. I'll talk about that in a second. Both of those had increased activity during those first few moments of being in the scanner and seeing the lights. And it was increased connectivity between the hippocampus and these regions. So again, it's these regions are talking to the hippocampus and telling the hippocampus which way to go, and it's related to the changes in gray matter within the hippocampus. So the context is, because again, it's important. So say you have a PTSD veteran, a veteran with PTSD. They come home, they hear car backfiring. In that context, it's important to know that, okay, I'm home. It's not gunshots. I'm okay. But if they get redeployed and go back, to where they were, and they hear a loud bang, they need to know that, okay, that's danger. And a fear response in that case is appropriate. So it's not just the stimulus, but also the context in which the stimulus is learned. And I sort of glossed over this. Oops, go back. Here, there's the lights were the same, but the images around the lights were different during conditioning and extinction. And during recall, it was again in the extinction context. So part of it, so they saw the lights. And so part of the proper responding was related to the fact that they saw that, okay, this was the extinction scenario and not the conditioning scenario. All right. So that is selection of the proper memory, right? So they're having better recall, so more specific, accurate memory recall in the mindfulness group compared to the controls. But then, so that's just the first few seconds of it. This goes on for 8 minutes. And during this 8-minute period, there's ongoing updating of the memory because, they don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they're going to get shocked again. And so the amygdala and hippocampus are continuously monitoring the situation and seeing, okay, what's happening? Am I safe or am I going to get shocked? And what we saw was really, really, really cool. So again, this has to do with the hippocampus connectivity to this area. This is sensory cortex. This corresponds to the hand area of sensory cortex, right? And so this is where the shock electrode was placed. So here it is, it's day 2. they're not actually being shocked. And yet the hippocampus is activating the hand area and the memory of the hand area where the shock was happening the day before, right? So they're not being shocked, but they're remembering the shock from the day before. They're also, there's decrease between the hippocampus and this area in the meditation group, but increased connectivity in the control group. This is an area of visual cortex that's related to anxiety. So, and again, it's been well established, nothing to do with meditation, that more activity here during these paradigms, these fear conditioning paradigms, is associated with increased anxiety and more anxiety. And we saw that in our group as well, that the more people activated this region, the more anxiety they reported. And again, this was more in the controls and less in the meditators. So, and we also saw this region, the supramarginal gyrus, which is the exact same region we saw changes in structure in the previous study. And again, we saw increased activation in the meditation group compared to the controls. And again, this is an area that's involved in saying, what do I pay attention to? Do I pay attention to my external world or my internal world? So this correlated with the amount of practice. So putting this all together, what we're seeing is that we have increased here. So what do I pay attention to? Internal, external world. Increased awareness of the sensory experience and decreased attention to the visual stream, right? And so this anxiety related area. And so how we're interpreting this is that in the controls, they're lying in the scanner and they're paying attention to the lights, right? And this is sort of associated sort of like with vigilance, right? And so it's not just paying attention, but it's like paying attention with anxiety. So vigilance, to what's going on around them. Versus the meditation group, they're chilling out. They're seeing the lights, right? Because obviously they learn the pattern better, right? They better learn the red and yellow light pattern than the control. So they're paying attention to the lights, but they're also paying attention to their hand, right? And to the actual sensory experience, right? So this is the mindfulness. So they're paying attention to their actual sensory experience, which is safety, versus being stressed out and thinking, okay, what's going to happen? Like the controls. And again, this was associated with less anxiety, better stress reduction, and better memory of the fear conditioning. So putting it all together, we're seeing that these changes in the hippocampus are important both for the selection of which memory, but then also throughout the entire 8 minutes that they're staying chill and just, paying attention to their actual experience, while the controls are being more vigilant. And again, we did not tell them anything before we put them in the scanner. So they're doing this spontaneously on their own without being told to be mindful. So conclusions are that mindfulness of the body is key for learning not to fear. And it seems to be driven by changes in hippocampal and amygdala structure and function. And we're shifting from thinking about and defending against threat to experiencing it openly with equanimity. And so I'm going to end with a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a famous monk who died a couple years ago. He says, meditation is not evasion. It's a serene encounter with reality. And this is really important for our emotional well-being, obviously, because, again, it's not just physical pain and anxiety that we deal with. Even with healthy, normal people, there's all sorts of stuff going around us. There's difficult people at work, there's traffic, there's all sorts of things around us. And we're not trying to avoid it. We're not shutting down. We're encountering it with serenity. And this is what increases our well-being. And so that I'll say thank you, and I'll stop sharing, and we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful. So we have time for some questions, and yay. We have time for some questions, and I think Josh is going to unmute people. So if you want to if you want to put your question in the chat, I'm happy to read it to Sarah. But if you just want to go ahead and speak out.
Looks like there's one person with a hand raised.
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, Shall I ask a question?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, first, namaste. I'm Ankit Gupta, a behavioral researcher from IIT Delhi, India. And it was a very meaningful talk. And we have heard about Dr. Sarah from Richard Davidson, who is on board to our lab. I am working on the behavioral basis of yoga practice at IIT Delhi with Professor Kar. So I would like to know, I have a very specific question. As you have suggested, the increased activations in the neural networks associated with the mindfulness practice. So, my question is, do you think the duration of a mindfulness practice influences the increased activations in the neural networks associated with the practice?
Right. So, does practice duration influence things? Excellent question. So, there's definitely data demonstrating that total amount of time spent practicing makes a difference, right? That the more you practice, the more benefit you're going to get, right? I showed a couple of those slides. Plenty of other people have also shown those. What we don't know, so we also know that everyone's told to practice 40 minutes a day at home. We know some people actually do practice 40 minutes a day at home. Most don't. Some practice 40 minutes, say 3, 4, 5 times a week. Some practice maybe just 20, 30 minutes a day. Some people only practice 5 or 10 minutes a day. And so at this point, we don't have enough data to be able to say, okay, you have to practice for at least this number of minutes a day in order to get the brain benefits, right? It could be that even if you just practice 10 minutes a day, that would be enough, but we don't know. And that's a study I would very much like to do. But it's hard because even if you tell them to practice 10 minutes a day, you don't get perfect compliance. So yeah, it's a great question, but we don't know, so overall, the more you practice, the more benefit you're going to get, but we don't know if there's a threshold limit of how much you need to practice.
All right, and thank you, ma'am, for this answering. And my another question is on. So actually, we use the theoretical framework of Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So it's a treatise on the Yoga Sutra by sage Patanjali.
Yep.
I believe you might be familiar with this.
Yep.
So we use this framework to design the paradigms. The behavioral paradigms here in our lab. So I would like to know, since most of your research revolves around basically the neural basis of the mindfulness practice. So do you think Yoga Sutra actually they explains the different different tendencies of the mind into 5 states: the proof, the Pramana, Vipraya, Vikalpa, and Didyata, Smriti. Smriti is one of the memory. So I would like to know what is your perspective, your opinion on the role of those 5 states of mind and the Vritis in explaining the benefits that mindfulness practice bestows upon the practitioners in terms of cognition or affective benefits.
Right. So make sure I understand. So in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about 5 different states of consciousness or 5 functions of consciousness, right? Or 5 functions of the mind. And so what is mindfulness doing to them? And so one of them is memory, one of them is cognition, and then I forget the other ones you said. Yeah. So I would say yes, it's influencing all of them, right? In different ways. And so clearly it seems to be enhancing memory. I didn't show it today. We have some other research. We sort of saw it here. So it does seem like part of the way it's enhancing memory. So part of the way it's enhancing memory is changing the hippocampus structure. And changing the connections to the hippocampus. So that seems to enhance certainly retrieval. Our other data shows it's awareness. So we do just a straight showing people pictures and having them, how well do they remember them? And again, the attention during encoding. So it's increasing in attention, and it makes sense, right? So the more you pay attention to something, the better you're going to remember it, right? So both this study and the other study, which is a little cleaner, is really clear. They're increasing attention to stimuli, and then that leads to better memory. So structure of the hippocampus and the input to the hippocampus is being enhanced by meditation. But then, so I also talked about the posterior cingulate getting shut down, and that PCC activity gets shut down with meditation. So the PCC, again, is associated with mind wandering and the default mode network. And so the whole default mode network gets shut down with meditation. And so, and one of the things that people who meditate regularly talk about is that, they're not lost in thought so much. And they're not, and their mind overall is more quiet. They have, you can walk through the day and just notice the trees and the sunshine and not be lost in thought, right? And so that's your default mode network getting shut down. And so the data is very consistent with that, both the, I think Patanjali talks about the fluctuating waves of perception or something like this, right? And so it does seem, so everyone I know who is like, oh, fluctuating waves, that's like EEG, right? And your brain waves, and so who knows, right? That's hand waving, right? But it does seem consistent with this, that it's, the mind is less active overall. And so that you're having this increased awareness of an experience of sensory experience. And that this is then beneficial in various different ways.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful explanation. And would you kind enough if you please provide the the link of the paper that you have cited in your just discussion on this, the Yoga Sutra and the different activations?
Yeah, I think you can find most of them on my website, I think.
I believe.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I can send them to Crystal, and she can post them.
Okay. Anyways, I'll connect with you with the email. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yeah, I'm going to read one from Blair, who doesn't have doesn't have a mic right now. So let's see. MBSR is a multi-component intervention. Do we know specifically that it is the non-judgmental mindfulness that results in these benefits?
Yeah, no. That's a good question. So okay, let's think about this. There have been various different studies that have tried to dismantle it in various different ways, and there's been mixed results. So I'd say sort of. There's questionnaires to assess mindfulness, and numerous studies have shown that these programs enhance mindfulness, and that mindfulness mediates increases in various different outcome measures. However, other programs, not ours, not the stress education program, but cognitive therapy can also enhance mindfulness, and that can also enhance mediate the outcomes. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher. So that might be more at least the non-judging part of it, or the less reactivity part of it. Someone did one where they did the MBSR program without actually teaching meditation. So they taught all the philosophy and all the theory, but they didn't actually meditate. And there was very little difference in outcome between, but that was specifically with depression. And they just looked at questionnaires. They didn't look at brain. They didn't look at anything else. So that's a bit of a head scratcher. And so again, so just maybe this idea, because again, the mindfulness, so learning about it, I think, is part of it, but then practicing it, because again, anyone can do it, but then the meditation is about enhancing it and strengthening it. So it's a little bit of a mixed, I'd say, in terms of evidence for it. But also a lot of people have argued that, it's important to have all the components together, that it's, most effective when you have all these different parts together. So, and probably the hippocampal change that may or may not be related to the non-judging awareness. That may just be related to some other function of the meditation. We just don't know. So, yeah, good questions.
Great. We have another one in the chat here. Can you talk a little more about the fear of physical pain and the anxiety associated? Oops, I just lost my place. And the and the anxiety associated with it. So, fear of physical pain, anxiety associated with it, particularly when the fear of pain is far worse than the actual pain. Is this fear of physical pain heightened for individuals who are aware, mindful of their current emotional state?
Right. So I don't know a whole lot about fear of pain, other than it's a big phenomenon. And I know, like with people with chronic pain, it's a quality of life thing, right? Because there's, they don't go out and do things because they're afraid of the pain. And there's been a couple of studies with MESR showing that the mindfulness has maybe minimal impacts on the pain, but it has big impacts on the fear of pain. And that's really, but that's important to people, right? Because it's like, I can live with the pain. I am not my pain. The pain doesn't control me. The pain doesn't rule me. So it's really, so this gets into, the well-being, right? Because they're learning to live with the pain. So again, life is painful, suffering is optional, right? And so we can't, some of us do have chronic pain, right? And so can you accept and live with the pain, even if it never, ever goes away? Sometimes call it like pain catastrophizing and stuff. The same idea that it's the, the both fear of pain and pain catastrophizing, which are related, both of those go down with meditation. I think that answer the question? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. This is from Jessica Gui. This work is so important and helpful. A huge thank you for the work you and your colleagues are doing. Can you talk a little more about, this keeps moving. Can you share how you might see your findings translating to child and adolescent populations? Are you and your team actively working with youth populations currently?
Right. We are not working with youth. That's hard. There's a whole other layer of complexity with working with kids. There has been some study with kids. So teaching kids, especially like little kids. I mean, so teenagers can meditate, right? And they can do more or less full blown MBSR. Little kids, asking a little kid to sit quietly for 40 minutes is a tall order. So little kids, often yoga is a little bit easier, or if you do meditation with them, you just do like 5 minutes. But the studies I've seen, I don't know that anyone's done anything with pain, but certainly they've done stuff with attention. And there was a brain scan study with kids, I think they were 4th and 5th graders. And I forget how much they actually practiced. I want to say it was just like 10, 20 minutes. And I think in class, I don't think they were told to practice at home. I think it was just like 2 or 3 classes a week. They practiced for 10 or 20 minutes. And the outcome was a cognitive attention task. And so they had increased performance on the task and changes in the attention networks, relative to the controls. I forget what the controls did. So yes, there is studies with kids. Yes, it can benefit the kids. I don't know about pain though. So.
Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat. Does anyone else want to ask a question, Sarah?
Perfect timing then.
Oh. Perfect, very good. Yep.
Cool. All right, well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. Yay, appreciate you.
Cool. All right.
So thanks again, Sarah. And this has been recorded and people can reach out to Sarah on their own if they want. Appreciate it.